G'day folks, my name is Rob and welcome back for another F1 fantasy video. In today's video we're going through my team selection for the Canadian Grand Prix, so as always if you're enjoying the content, you're new around here and you want to see more F1 fantasy information and videos, be sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel so you're up to date on everything that goes live on the Formula Fantasy Hub YouTube channel. We're going to take a look at my Spanish Grand Prix outcome for my F1 fantasy team. And in Spain, the Barcelona de Catalunya Grand Prix, we had 274 points all out. And a pretty good weekend once again for the team here. Went into the deadline undecided as to whether I'd go down a wildcard route or just make two transfers on the back of a very successful Limitless in Monaco. Opted for the former and rolled with pretty much the makings of my team I had in Imola, with the exception of the Mercedes constructor, which I took out for Ferrari and replaced Alex Albon with Liam Lawson for that budget gain upside, which he ultimately delivered. So a pretty good weekend for the team, all things considered. It was somewhat unexpected, I will say, simply because of the fact that even though the budget gain was obviously there, the points that flowed from Liam Lawson and Isaac Hadjar was a great outcome nonetheless. Oscar Piastri won the race, 45 points for him, fastest lap, and another great weekend for the Aussie, his fifth race win this season. And for me, I'm glad I stuck with him. I was deliberating if I went down the wildcard route whether to go for Lando Norris as a 2x differential option. I would have had more or less the same team, but I'm glad I stuck with Oscar because I did know coming into Canada and beyond that Piastri would be a transfer back into my team, and obviously to limit the number of -10s or extra transfers, which can be pretty valuable in F1 fantasy given how much seems to change every single race week. I'm really glad I stuck with Oscar and he very much delivered a really good score there. Speaking of drivers that have had incredible run of form lately, has to be Isaac Hadjar. He banked 16 points and another top 10 finish, actually finished P7, and a great Sunday with 6 overtakes and a couple of positions gained. So that's been his second double-digit score in a row after finishing in Monaco with 12. Obviously didn't have him on Limitless, but he has been unbelievably good this season. Just seems to completely outperform that RB week to week, an absolute qualifying merchant, and has even been able to replicate that good form on the Sunday. So a really impressive outing for the French driver. His teammate Liam Lawson, who came in to replace Albon, another 9 points. Both of these guys gained 0.6 in value. So great cost cap building assets in Spain, and seems to be the case heading into Canada as well. As for the two back markers, Colapinto and Bortoleto, 10 points between them, certainly not the end of the world. I think for their price and general production, not too bad. I would say, given I was actually entertaining the idea of moving off Colapinto in Spain, I'm not closing the door on it. The fact that he's actually been able to build up a good baseline of fantasy points makes me think he might be a hold for another week. But Bortoleto certainly seems to be one on the chopping block. He has had, 4 points after 3 in Monaco, but that car is an absolute dustbin, and we saw an excellent result from his teammate, which we'll talk about shortly. But I don't really expect that kind of production from Gabriel Bortoleto, to be completely honest. And I think with the likes of Nico Hülkenberg, Fernando Alonso producing the goods in Spain, and the fact that the rest of the team seems pretty well set up at the moment for budget gain, I would be inclined to potentially move off Bortoleto heading into the next race weekend of the season. As for the constructors, 88 points for McLaren, 61 for Ferrari, the two highest scoring constructors of the weekend. Pretty happy with, again, how that came around. I was, again, heading into the deadline. If you're on my stream, thank you. Another fantastic stream this season on Saturday. Thinking about Red Bull or Ferrari, went down the Ferrari route after the Sims kind of pushed me in that direction. I was really expecting Max to do more with Red Bull, and we saw how much he lost his head on Sunday. It was a pretty diabolical last 10 laps or so for him, and glad I made the decision. My team too had Red Bull on a wild card. So I think it was a line ball decision. I wouldn't fault you if you backed Max at Spain, where he's had some really good history there. It's just one of those situations where the luck and, Mad Max comes out when things don't go his way. You could say the same about Ferrari and their absolute dog's breakfast of a strategy from race to race, but Leclerc and Hamilton did enough to turn in 61 points and another 10-point bonus in the pit stop department. So pretty happy, all things considered, with how Ferrari did. I think they seem like a pretty good hold heading into Canada, particularly just because of the likes of Red Bull, Mercedes aren't likely to get the max rise that race weekend. So all in all, a pretty good race weekend for my team, up about 2.5k in the global leaderboard to 5.5k overall. So let me know how you're doing in the comments below. I think it's a nice build towards more momentum heading into the next part of the season. In terms of some weekend notes, some unexpected swings from unexpected assets. I want to talk about Nico Hülkenberg first and foremost, because the German driver served up one of his all-time great drives in recent memory. 32 F1 fantasy points. Honestly, unbelievable when you consider the fact that that car has been an absolute dustbin all season. I've seen Toyota Camrys on the road outside go faster than that Kick-Sauber has at points in the season. And to come away with 32 points, 10 positions gained, 10 points for the race position itself, and then another 12 overtakes. Honestly, so impressive. So really, if you had Hülkenberg, really well done there. You wouldn't have been forgiven for not going down that route. And I thought that drive in Australia, where he came away with 20 points, was a great result for him. But to come away with 32 points and carry that Sauber after people have been laughed at for owning the Kick-Sauber constructor, to carry that team to 52 F1 fantasy points this weekend, truly phenomenal effort there. So a huge swing of points for a driver that deserved to have won Driver of the Day. I think that award in itself doesn't belong in F1 fantasy, but for Hülkenberg to kind of come away with 30 plus points, you can honestly think he's probably been a bit hard done by when someone like Max Verstappen, who had moments of head loss in the closing stages of Spain, honestly banked that 10 points instead. I also have to give kudos just very briefly to Isaac Hadjar as well, a driver that, as I think many people now own, that double-digit performance over the last two races sets him up for what seems to be another 0.6 rise in Canada. And then Fernando Alonso, the newest $4.5 million rookie on the block last race weekend. I was talking up his favoritism in F1 fantasy, and it would have been a -10 for me, or probably would have activated the wild card, but then I probably in that sense would have gone for Lando Norris, but glad I didn't. But notwithstanding that, I do think Fernando himself, with 14 points after DNFing in Monaco, DNFing in Miami, and then back-to-back DNFs to start the year off, feels like the Aston Martin might be turning a corner here. So one eye on him heading into Canada, and I think if you're in a position where your team's set up, you don't really need to make too many transfers for the Canadian Grand Prix. Fernando Alonso could be that luxury transfer we've talked about in recent times. Now, speaking of other decisions for our team, the second constructor with that new technical directive, we really weren't sure about that heading into the deadline all that much in Spain. It seems just by product of the fact that Mercedes and Red Bull in the A tier have dropped away with kind of that lack of production in F1 fantasy, means Ferrari de facto becomes the 2IC to McLaren. But if we go into the B tier, there was Williams that was talked about before the deadline. They've also fallen away. They're now the B tier constructor that requires the most points for a price rise. So I think most people are going cold turkey on the Grove-based outfit. The attention, if you're looking to really prioritize budget, and I think if you're kind of below 108 to 110 in value, VCARB should be your priority target. I just think they've got a lot of upside. The car is really driving well between Hadjar and Lawson, and I do think could be a popular budget building B-tier constructor in the weeks ahead. And speaking of kind of what the next few weeks looks like, the template I really thought would diverge a little bit after Spain with that new technical directive. It feels like McLaren have actually put even more distance between them and the rest of the field. And to be honest with you, with the way budget building is going at the moment, I don't think that's suddenly going to change anytime soon. People are going to again be pressed into that double VCARB driver lineup maybe a 4.5 in either Colapinto, Bortoleto, and Alonso, and maybe one other driver with Piastri, McLaren, and Ferrari to fill out that team. So I thought there would be, a big kind of influx of wildcard use last weekend with the TD. That didn't really happen, and now that we've seen 4 or 5 drivers in the B tier set themselves up for another max or some kind of price rise in Canada, makes me think it's going to be pretty template this time around in the upcoming Grand Prix. So unless we see any real drastic changes, I think it'll be pretty copy-paste for many teams in Canada. Now, speaking of Canada and Canadian drivers in particular, we obviously got the news before the deadline that Lance Stroll wasn't racing in Spain. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love a conspiracy theory, and there are quite a few out there of kind of what that means for Stroll not wanting his reputation in tatters if a replacement driver came in. I'm not going to speculate too much. There was a couple of really interesting articles out there in the Twitterverse over the weekend of kind of what Stroll's position in Aston Martin means and whether or not they might make a play for a driver like Max Verstappen. Speaking of F1 fantasy specifically, if you own Lance Stroll, there aren't many of you, I will admit, but if you do own Lance Stroll and you use the final fix to great effect, congratulations. If you still have him in your team, I'd get him out instantly because it doesn't look like he'll be racing for his home race with this imminent wrist surgery expected. Now, I can't say for certain when the likely return for Stroll will be. I'm not suggesting he's suddenly going to be on the radar anytime soon, but I'm curious to know how long it would take for him to come back into Formula One. I'm no doctor, but let's play, Dr. Google right here on screen. Wrist surgery for Lance Stroll. I have no idea what the extent of this injury is. But knowing him and knowing his history with that injury in 2023, we probably won't see him back for at least a couple of races, a few weeks to several months. Now, I don't think it'll be kind of that longer end of the scale, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see him miss at least a couple of Grand Prix, definitely Canada in the next 2 weeks, maybe even Austria, which is in late June. And we've got 4 weeks between now and then before we get to Austria, the Red Bull Ring. So let's just keep an eye on that. But I don't think Stroll is in F1 fantasy. If his replacement comes into the game, whether that's Drugovich, Van Dorn, whoever it might be, Valtteri Bottas has been thrown around as well, they'll just come in at Lance Stroll's price. We've kind of seen that in F1 fantasy, that replacement drivers will just come in as the incumbent's price. So I wouldn't be going out and buying them unless suddenly Aston Martin look like a top 2, top 3 team in early 2023, which I don't think will happen. But at the same time, Stroll, I think for me, is an avoid. Now, some transfer targets and thoughts. Nico Hülkenberg, the first, V-Carb, the second. We've talked about both of them already, and I think both just because of the fact they have a very low threshold for a max price rise in Canada, sets them up nicely as assets to buy this week. Hülkenberg, 6.6 million. I wouldn't say a differential asset, but a lot of people did sell him after Monaco just because he was expected to struggle to get a max rise. If anything, it's quite the opposite here in Canada. He's just been very consistent all season. We've seen that disqualification from him earlier in the year in Bahrain, but aside from that, he's been pretty impeccable in terms of consistency. His best score this season in Spain, that 20-point performance in Albert Park, and then just kind of done bits around F1 fantasy, generally speaking. Otherwise, 9 points Miami, 9 points in Imola. So I think he's a perfectly fine buy for anyone that has spare cash on the side. I myself will be considering him. And I think just because we're looking to continue to accrue value while we can and try and build towards that 2 A-tier driver lineup later in the season, Hülkenberg becomes a very attractive option. V-Carb, the same reason. They've come in at a very affordable price on our F1 fantasy radars at 11.8. Some people already moved to them in Spain, and kudos to you if you did. Now, V-Carb lineups actually didn't, if you went triple McLaren and triple V-Carb or something like that, didn't score all that much more than the Piastri, Ferrari, McLaren lineup. But I think, again, if you're looking to build budget, they've got really good recent history with 35, 31, and 25. Hajar is driving out of his skin. Lawson is doing enough to be in and around the points. And I do think, for me, V-Carb is probably the only constructor in the B tier I'd be looking at right now as a differential option. So a big fan of both heading into this weekend. I think I'll be very much seriously considering Nico Hulkenberg. VCARB, we'll go through a team lineup in just a second, but I'm not sure it's for me as of right now. Now, early team thoughts, a little bit to get through here. I think most of it's self-explanatory, and for many of you running a similar team, probably more or less what you're thinking about this weekend as well. 2 transfers this Grand Prix. Might actually just use one, roll the other into Austria, have a bit of flexibility. There's nothing wrong with that. I've also got the wild card still. I'm really thinking it could be a second half of the season chip if I ultimately go down the path of being differential when cost cap is less of a priority than it might be right now. So yeah, Bortoleto, Colapinto, the 2 drivers at risk. I'm very curious to see kind of what I can do to manipulate my team. So let's dive in right now and see what we can do with this lineup. So this is the team from Spain. And as I said, probably set and forget for most of this lineup. Definitely the 2 V-Cup drivers, Piastri, McLaren, Ferrari, simply because of the budget building aspect and the fact that all of these drivers don't need to score much at all to see a price rise or a max rise. Now, I talked about Colapinto and Bortoleto. I both think they're drivers that have DNFs waiting to happen. We saw Bortoleto bin it in Monaco, somehow managed to finish the race. We saw Colapinto in his very first race weekend fluff it in Imola, and I just haven't been impressed with Colapinto, to be honest. Bortoleto too, but he's going to sit a bit further back. He did actually have his best qualifying result in Spain. So it doesn't really matter right now, I think, for the $4.5 million asset. I could go Fernando Alonso in one move, or if I want to be a little bit more adventurous with budget building, I might just go Hulkenberg instead. I've got so much money on the side here from what I left over in Spain. And ultimately, if I feel like Colapinto just ain't it, then I'll probably put Alonso in as well. But I just don't really see for my team a need to mix it up too much with the rest of the team. Looking at the budget builder specifically, Red Bull and Mercedes, I think, are completely off the table as it stands right now. Unless you think Red Bull and Max, who won at Canada last year, is a guaranteed win, I think Red Bull, for me, probably an avoid until the team starts to recover in the point scoring department. And Mercedes, another DNF from Antonelli, 24 points in Spain. Wouldn't touch them as of right now. Give them a few more weeks until these DNFs fall off their average. VCARB, as I've already mentioned, a great source of budget building right now compared to the rival in Williams, who was a popular F1 fantasy asset a couple weekends ago, no longer kind of in favoritism. And even though they're getting close to the A tier, I think you might have to wait a few more weeks for that to happen. Kick, look, let's talk about Kick, because for me personally, they're just, I think for what we got, sorry, wrong screen to stop sharing, but I think Kick for me, you can make a lineup with them work. 6.3 million because they were 4.5 a couple weeks ago, so they've gone up in value. You could do a lot with this Kick lineup. You could definitely get in triple McLaren, and then like where else is the upgrade? For me personally, I just don't see any point in getting rid of Hadjar and Lawson. But if we're trying to find drivers that could, it's hard because there's no other driver at the moment that I can afford. You might, if you've got a really good budget, stretch to like a Carlos Sainz or something. I just don't think, I think Kick Sauber, Bortoleto, Hulkenberg, more often than not, are never going to score 50 points. That was a one-off by a long shot. I think 20 points is about as best as it will usually get. So that's right. If I'm going a B-tier constructor, it's got to be Racing Bulls. Again, if you can do the triple up on McLaren, that's probably my preference. Otherwise, if your budget's a bit short and you want to get a bit fruity with your picks, then maybe Leclerc, because if we're looking at the top drivers, Max Verstappen, no chance he gets 45 in Canada unless he turns in a performance for the ages. So you probably want to go Leclerc, and then that leaves you with a Carlos Sainz or a Stroll replacement. I thought Ocon, honestly, was going to be more of an option this weekend, but he needs 8 points. I'm just not sure that's enough. The Haas seems to have taken a step back. So there's some things to play around with, but for me, it seems almost too obvious to go for Ferrari right now based on how they look, and then fill your team up with what you can afford. So I think, it would be Lawson, and then if I can squeeze in Hulkenberg. That's kind of my initial read right now, but things could change before the deadline. So that's my early team thoughts. We've got a couple weeks off in between races. So I'll be back with my final thoughts much closer to the F1 Fantasy deadline in Canada. But in the meantime, guys, I hope you enjoy the break in between races. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all very soon.